Kapitam Jaina Bhutale. What's the next line? Swayam Rupagada Mayam Nadati Swapadantikam. Just seeing if anyone was paying attention. Vandeham Siguro Sijuta Parakamalam Sigurur Vaishnavam Cha Sri Rupam Sagar Jatam Sahagana Raganathan Mitantang Sajivam Sadvaitam Sabadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitangscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Sapsakanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakapachurvascha Kripa Sindhu Devacha Patitanam Bhavanevyo Vaishnavevyo Namo Namaha Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Cheva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udidayet Nasta Presho Vadreshu Nityam Bhagavat Shevaya Bhagavad Uttama Shloki Bhakti Bhavati Naistiki. Today, April 10th, 2025, we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Creation of the Fourth Order. Chapter 27, Attack by Chandavega on the city of King Puranjana, as well as the character of Kala Kanya. Today, text 28. Maya nirupitastubhyam Patir Atma Samadhina Navinandati Lokoyam Fama Badram Asamatam Maya nirupitastubhyam Patir Atma Samadhina Navinandati Lokoyam Tvamabhadram Sammatam Maya nirupitastubhyam Patiratma Samadhina Navinandati Lokoyam Tvamabhadram Sammatam
Maya nirupitastubhyam
Patir Atma Samadhina Navinandati Lokoyam Tvamabhadram Sammatam Maya nirupitastubhyam Patiratma Samadhina Navinandati Lokoyam Tvamabhadram Sammatam Maya nirupitastubhyam Patiratma Samadhina Navinandati Lokoyam Tvamabhadram Sammatam Maya nirupitastubhyam Patiratma samadhina Navinandati lokoyam Tvamabhadrama samatam Maya nirupitastubhyam Patiratma samadhina Navinandati lokoyam Tvamabhadrama samatam. Right, these synonyms, please repeat. Maya, by me. Nirupitaha, settled. Tubhyam, for you. Patihi, husband. Atma, of the mind. Samadhina, by meditation. Na, never. Abhinandati, welcome. Lokaha, the people. Ayam, these. Tvam, you. Abhadram, inauspicious. Asamatam, unacceptable. Translation. By His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. The king of the Yavanas replied, after much consideration, I have arrived at a husband for you. Actually, as far as everyone is concerned, you are inauspicious and mischievous. Since no one likes you, how can anyone accept you as his wife? Pretty tough words there. Bhagavatam tells it like it is. Please repeat. The king of the Yavanas replied, after much consideration, I have arrived at a husband for you. Actually, as far as everyone is concerned, you are inauspicious and mischievous. Since no one likes you, how can anyone accept you as his wife? Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. After much consideration, the king of the Yavanas decided to make the best use of a bad bargain. Kalakanya was a bad bargain, and no one liked her. But everything can be used for the service of the Lord. Thus, the king of the Yavanas tried to utilize her for some purpose. The purpose has already been explained. That is, Kalakanya as Jara, the invalidity of old age, can be used to arouse a sense of fear in people so that they will prepare for the next life by engaging in Krishna consciousness. Maya nirupitastubhyam patir atma samadhina navinandati lokoyam tvam abhadram samatam. The king of the Yavanas replied, after much consideration, I have arrived at a husband for you. Actually, as far as everyone is concerned, you are inauspicious and mischievous. Since no one likes you, how can anyone accept you as his wife? Mokum karoti vachalam pangam lagayate girim Shakripa tamaham bande Sri Gurum dinacharina Paramananda Madhavam. So here is this Jara. Would you like to marry her? She is the invalidity of old age, and she is very inauspicious and mischievous, and no one likes her. Would you like to accept her as your wife? No, thank you. Little interesting turn in this story here, which is an allegory. It's an allegorical story. It's not a historical account, but it does include pretty much the history of everyone and everything, as far as like royal families and the position of the Kshatriya kings trying to collect the taxes and run their kingdoms, and meanwhile accumulating great wealth. And as was mentioned earlier on in the chapter, collecting taxes and then spending the money to enjoy sense gratification. So that's pretty much the history of the world, of the civilized world. But this has been a theme of mine lately, the difference between the modern scholar's view of the history of the world and the Vedic view of the history of the world. A little bit more later with some interesting presentations that you might find fascinating, especially if you have a slight propensity to delve into the history of Jesus Christ. Who I always kind of liked as a kid, growing up in the Southern Methodist Church, which later became the Methodist Church. And now I think it's all a bunch of homosexuals and transsexuals, as far as I know. There was one Methodist church here we went to, and one person who used to be a devotee here is a transsexual that's very heavily involved in that church. So, you know, these times they are changing. But when I was a child, I was quite attracted to the good qualities of Jesus. You know, Jesus with the picture, like the picture of Jesus with the lamb and that kind of stuff. You know, the peaceful, loving kind of thing. I always thought that was kind of cool. And then one time, when I was, in elementary school, they took us on a field trip to the Jewish Community Center. And we had to go all the way to Dallas, like 20 miles. Because in the suburb we lived in, there was no Jewish Community Center. There is now, but there wasn't then. And in this Jewish Community Center, it was very attractive and very amazing because there was all these kids, and they had like pool tables and ping pong tables, and they had all this great stuff that we didn't have. Our church was just a very small little church, and it had all this great stuff. I mean, it was like heaven on earth for a kid, all the games and all these bright-faced, intelligent, rich kids running around. I was blown away by that experience. Wow, man, these guys got something going on in their religion. They're trying to recreate heaven on earth, the heavenly planets. And then when we got back, they asked us to draw a picture of something of our experience of the Jewish Community Center. And so different people were drawing different things, and they laughed very hard at me because I drew a picture of the drinking fountain there that was really nice. It was really first class, like a Kohler brand drinking fountain with nice cold water. And to me, that was so luxurious and opulent. And that was my favorite thing out of everything. And then they laughed so hard. He drew the drinking fountain. That was the most impressive thing to him. What's the matter with this kid? What a weirdo. But I was impressed by their facilities and their opulence, cold water out of a drinking fountain, because the one at school we had didn't work very good and wasn't cold. First elementary school I went to was quite old. And an old beat up brick building, and everything was kind of run down. But this place was Slarga Loca. So I was very impressed by that. But at any rate, I was attracted to the concept of spirituality somehow or other. And my favorite thing in church when I was a little kid, and again, it was a small church, but it was rather newish construction, St. Stephen's Methodist Church, that when the whole congregation was gathered on Sunday morning and they would recite things congregationally, like we do, Vancha Kalpa Tribhascha, we recite things congregationally, everyone together. We recite the Bhagavad Gita verses, both in Sanskrit and English. There was no Sanskrit in this church. There was English. But The way the chapel was constructed, it had kind of a high ceiling, a lot higher than this ceiling. This is one of the lower ceilings you will find in the church anywhere. And they had all the pews and there was men and women and children, and everyone would recite congregationally things like the Lord's Prayer or translations for different hymns. And the vibration in the room of the sound of all the voices speaking congregationally together. You had the low frequency voices of the men and the high frequency voices of the ladies. And all together congregation, there would be about, more than 100 people there. It was powerful. It was, Shabda ke poro shambarishu. It had potency. And the purpose of that recitation, of course, was spiritual, dipping into the spiritual realm and vibrating the things, about the Spirit and about God. And that was very attractive to me, extremely attractive, because just the sound, from the point of view of like my recording, apparently I was born with recording studio engineer ears, kind of stick out. There was one advertisement in Recording magazine, and then they showed a picture of like 4 people, and they say, "Can you tell who was cut out for the studio?" And there's one kid there with these big ears that stick way out, like rabbit ears, and pull in all this freak. And that sound vibration, which was intended to glorify the Lord and bring about create a spiritual atmosphere, I was attracted to that. There was so many other things I was not attracted to. The bureaucracy and the mundane people in the church and everything. No. Matter of fact, we had a 1963 Volkswagen bus, which was our family station wagon. And the Volkswagen bus, you didn't need a key to turn on the radio. It was hooked up to the battery circuit directly, so you could listen to the radio while the car was off. And as well, the windshield wipers would work too. And so we would sneak out of the church service and go sit in the Volkswagen van and play like we were in a spaceship. And the windshield wipers were going, and the radio was our communication with Earth, and because the electricity worked. So that was when the preacher was droning on, much like I'm doing here. So if anyone has a car that the radio works, you could go run out there now. Of course, in our temple in Alachua, they have a transmitter hooked up to the sound system. It used to be more powerful. You could hear it on the interstate. You could hear it in Gainesville, 20 miles away. And they would play, like we do here also, they would play Prabhupada bhajans all day long on the temple sound system, and that was broadcast on the radio. But also you could tune into the Bhagavatam class. But then they became a little paranoid that the FCC was cracking down on unlicensed radio stations, and they cut the power back to 1 watt. But there was a big antenna there. And then I couldn't get it. I was 5 miles from the temple. I couldn't get it anymore. But then they had the internet so you could tune in online, just like you can here also. So those are all great and wonderful things. So in Alachua, if somebody doesn't want to sit in the class, first of all, they have the class on speakers outdoors, but you can go in the parking lot and sit in your car and tune it in on the FM radio, which is kind of nice, So you don't have to sit there, because some people sit there, it's like, tough sitting on the floor, closer you are to the floor, like, more it kind of like lures you down into the modes where you fall asleep. So at any rate, returning to this allegory from our little detour there, there is a value in the way Maya punishes the jiva who has forgotten Krishna. She punishes him in various ways. And being the jiva who's getting the punishment, we think, what's up with that? I prefer not to be squashed down and punished and frustrated and, at every step, at every turn, some difficulty, some detail. And you go through life. It never stops. It never slows down. get up over on top of the situation, because the material energy is always smashing you down and making you suffer. Just like there was one incident where there was with Srila Prabhupada, a story that was told. So there was a poster, and there's Durga riding on her tiger. And it's one of those Brijabasi posters, which those are very cool posters. The artwork is great. And they somehow have, these artists are just tuned in. So it shows, underfoot, a person, a face of somebody suffering, being, stepped on by the tiger and squashed down by Durga, who has like spears and different weapons in her hands. And then that face is just like a terrified face filled with anxiety. And one time the devotees, that poster was on the wall in Prabhupada's room. The devotees are sitting there with Prabhupada. Prabhupada pointed over to that. He said, "Who is that?" Pointing at that, poor suffering dude in the picture getting squashed by Maya. And they were looking, and they were like, because Prabhupada would ask a question, devotees had no idea what he had in mind. It would always be very surprising. And they're trying to figure out, who did it look like? That looks like Krishnadas Prabhu. Kinda, without the hair. Sometimes you see that too. You see somebody in those faces because they look like someone. And devotees were trying to figure it out, and they didn't know what Prabhupada was trying to communicate, and they couldn't come up with the answer. And then Prabhupada said, "It is you! It is you! You are being crushed by Maya. That is you, the living entity." So nice Srila Prabhupada, always surprising everyone, and at the same time giving the pure Krishna conscious message. So in this allegory, this Jara, she represents the invalidity of old age. Like, who wants to marry her? She's inauspicious. She's up to no good. She has bad qualities. Who wants to have anything to do with her? And then Prabhupada says in the purport, but everything has a utility in the service of Krishna. So the utility of Jara, she makes people afraid of old age and death. And thus it said that fear is an impetus to become Krishna conscious. It's a good reason to think that, oh no, death is coming. Old age has arrived. And that's the next thing after old age is death. What am I going to do now? Everything's going to be taken away. This is a horrible situation. You're literally scared to death. But that's an impetus. Oh, I better get my Krishna consciousness together and, hear and chant and use my remaining time. And that is the purpose of retirement in old age, which, like in places like India, is at 55 years old. Here, the retirement age is 65, and they've moved it up a little bit for your Social Security, full Social Security benefits, like 67 or whatever it is, right? I don't know. I never paid into the Social Security system, so I don't really know. But something like that. You can claim early benefits, but then they just give you a little, they cheap out on you. You try to get it early, and that affects the rest of your whole life. Whereas if you wait till full retirement age, then you get the full benefit. But like in India, it's 55 years old, and 55 is, that's relatively kind of youngish. For an old person, 55 is young, and for a young person, 55 is old. So 55, your energy's still good. Everything hadn't started to quit working on you, like it for sure will at some point or other later, due to, if you have good health in the modern age, 50s are okay, 60s, 70s, woo, 80s, So, there's no stopping the march of time and the inevitability of death. And it's really funny, something that happened just very recently. One of our friends came here, and he says, "How's it going, Dhiro?" I said, well, everything's pretty good aside from birth, death, old age, and disease. And he said, you sound just like a parrot. I said, oh, yeah? I said, do you not see the old age, disease, and death all around you? Oh, come on, man. And then he comes in here the other day and he says, and you heard him sit down. He said, this birth, death, and old age and disease is really a bummer. It's because his mother is, how old is she? 99 years old or something? Living in the facility, being taken care of. She's bedridden and she sleeps all day. And he said, this is a real drag. And he was like exactly repeating what I had said to him 10 days before. He got the realization. Krishna gave him the realization. And now he was the parrot. But it's not a parrot. It's realized knowledge that comes, and he himself is older than me. He's not a young fellow by any stretch. And he is having realization about this due to the association of Krishna consciousness. And just you casually hear these things discussed amongst devotees all the time. Prabhupada says one should keep the facts of birth, death, old age, and disease in front of one all the time and know that, hey, death is coming. And so you have to be prepared. And if you're prepared by being Krishna conscious, you're good. If you're not prepared, you're not good. You're bogus. Who knows what's going to happen to you? So that impetus is there. And that is one of the items of knowledge that's presented in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. I think it's text number 12, that Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadi, Dukkha Doshana Darshanam. One should have awareness, our perception, as Prabhupada puts it, of the evils of birth, death, old age, and disease. It's not the niceties of birth, death, old age, and disease. Oh, birth is so nice. You're floating in the womb. You're all happy. You think, oh yeah, people sentimentally think that, being in the womb is so nice, but not according to Bhagavatam. There's worms biting you. Maybe the mother eats some spicy food and it burns. It's like, and you're all cramped up and your neck is bent over and you can't move and you're like, let me out of here. That's right in the Bhagavatam. This is knowledge from the Bhagavatam. It's a horrible condition. So much so that right before, you're in there for 9 months. But the last while that you're in there, last month or two, you're like, God, I can't stand this. Let me out of here. And then the living entity actually prays to God, to Krishna, right out of the Bhagavatam. We're not making this stuff up, okay? This is right from Bhagavatam, right from Shastra. He's praying, please release me from the suffering condition. I'll do anything. I'll become your devotee. I know I have forgotten you in my previous life, but in this life, I'll serve you. Just let me out. And then boom, he takes birth, and then the doctor slaps the baby and forgets everything. Forgets everything. But, at least he's released from that terrible suffering in the womb. Not that nice, floating, beautiful thing that the New Age people, in their complete ignorance of the reality of the facts on the ground, like to talk about. You ever heard that kind of thing? Oh, yes, we would like to, we just want to return to the womb. It was a nice, safe, warm place, 98.6 degrees, and floating in the bath. And they even have these spas where you can go where they their idea is to recreate that situation in the womb. Well, how about they tie your feet to your neck and you're like, ah! That would be a real recreation. And then pour in a bucket of biting worms and scorpions and things. Not like that. That's not what we do at our spa. We play the nice New Age music and return you to No. But we take our knowledge from Shastra, but by practicing Krishna consciousness, not only do we know these things philosophically and intellectually, but we begin to gain realization. And this is actually what happened to our friend in regard to his aging mother. And he was deriding the chanting of the birth, death, old age, and disease mantra, and then suddenly he himself is espousing it with his own realization. Very good. So you may think, oh, the devotees, negative, talking about the material world, such a crappy place. Well, it is. And if you think it's a nice place and you want to stay here and remain happy, you can stay here, but you will not be happy. You can stay here. We've already stayed here long. We've overstayed our welcome in the material world already through billions of lifetimes. And, is there anybody home up there? Like, do you realize you're suffering? So in the second chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, it's a very powerful chapter which gives a lot of key elements of our philosophy and how it works, how the science of bhakti actually works. There's one nice verse number 7. Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janat Yasya Vairagyam Yanam Chayada Hetukam. So by rendering a devotional service to the personality of Godhead, of Vasudeva, the result is that Janat Yasu Vairagyam, that you acquire causeless knowledge of or scientific knowledge. Prabhupada translates it a few verses later. Bhagavat Tattva Viganam. You get scientific realization, scientific positive knowledge of the personality of Godhead. So that's a concomitant byproduct of rendering devotional service to Krishna. That knowledge is manifest in your heart. So right now our heart is covered with ignorance. So to have that knowledge manifest in our heart means to uncover that ignorance, to dissipate it, to break it up, and to shine the light into the dark place and have the knowledge revealed. Jnana dipena bhashvata, like Krishna says in the 10th chapter of the Gita, that he said, I bring this flashlight, like one of Gaura Shakti's little flashlights. He hates turning on lights, but he likes to shine the little flashlight. When all he has to do is turn on the light, he can see everything. And turn on the flashlight, it's one little tiny thing in the light. Jnana dipena bhashvata. It says, I bring this deepa, this lamp of knowledge into the heart of the devotee, and that destroys the ignorance, the darkness of ignorance that's there. Krishna Surya Sam Maya Haya Anthankar Yahan Krishna Tahan Nahi Maya Adhikar. That Krishna Surya Sam, Krishna is like the sun, Surya. Maya Haya Anthankar. Maya is like darkness. But wherever the sun is shining, the darkness cannot remain. So that's the motto of Back to Godhead. Godhead is light. Nescience is darkness. And wherever the light is, the darkness cannot remain. So the light of knowledge of Krishna consciousness, it obliterates the darkness. It destroys the ignorance that's within the heart. And that is the real way to see by that purification. So not only one acquires knowledge by Krishna's mercy through practicing bhakti, the science of bhakti. This is the result. You practice a science, and that ignorance is destroyed, and then knowledge is manifest in your person. Yasyastir bhaktir bhagavati akinchana. Sarvarganas tatra samasate sada. Not only just, not like book knowledge, ABC, but realized knowledge, jnana chakshus, spiritual vision. What do we say every day? He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge, the words of the spiritual master. So we're blinded and we can't see, and then the light is shined. Oh no, now I can see clearly. That is coming through the purification of the heart through the hearing process. So not only one can see clearly and the light illuminates everything, but jana yat yashu vairagyam, one becomes detached. This Vairagya is very important. I always thought if I ever had a male child, I would name him Vairagya, because it's such a great concept. That one is, raga means attachment, and Vairagya means without attachment. Just like Kunta means anxiety, and Vaikunta means freedom from anxiety. There is no anxiety. So Vairagya, there is no attachment to sense gratification. That attachment is destroyed with the sword of knowledge. One slashes through the knots, the cords, the ropes of attachment, and one becomes detached. And the situation of detachment, it is very nice, because it is our attachment to Maya, to this body, to the senses, to the false ego by which we misidentify ourselves as a product of matter. And by the way, the more one identifies oneself as a product of matter, the more one is godless. So if you ever notice these like, I love to pick on them, these what I call Christian demons, these born again Christians, they're always like the biggest meat eaters and the biggest racists and the most intolerant and the most obnoxious people walking around. Ever notice that? You go to campus? Yeah, every day. We used to go preaching with the Krishna Fest party on the National Mall. I mentioned this recently, from the Air and Space Museum. And these Christian guys would come up, and they're like they even had like these Christian bikers, you know, and they're the worst of the worst kind of human beings. And then they're claiming Jesus. Who wants to ride the bike for Jesus? You know, greasy big guys with big ugly beards, and you know, Lucci probably hadn't bathed in who knows when. And then they're talking about Jesus. Like, what the heck, man? You know, what a caricature. But having grown up in the South and being well aware of the both the lifestyle and the habitation of these very ignorant people who claim Christianity as their path, but their lifestyle has nothing to do with any of that. They do not follow a spiritual path, not the path of the early Christians, not the path that's according to the teachings of Jesus in the Bible. Nothing to do with that. And they've even had this phenomena where they have these right-wing fanatic Christian churches, and if they get a pastor who's too enlightened, they'll either try to run him out, or they'll quit going to that church and they'll go to the next right-wing church down the street. Because why? Because this pastor at this church, it was a book written by a guy who was the son of a big right-wing pastor with a big congregation, and he became the pastor. And then his congregation turned on him because he wasn't right-wing political. And their whole thing wasn't Jesus. Their whole thing was right-wing politics. The politics of hate and envy. That was their thing. And if you weren't hateful and envious enough, then either you're gone or we're leaving you. We're going to the next place down the street where the guy's a real redneck. And he really hates everybody else. And that's what we want. That's what we like. You know? Plus, there's better barbecue there. These are things happening right in front of our very eyes. And it becomes more pronounced in the Kali Yuga. Then a couple of verses later, verse 12 in the second chapter of the Bhagavatam, says, Tradadana muna yogana vairagya yuktaya pasyat yatmani chatmanam bhakti shuta grihitaya, which states, very nice verse, the seriously inquisitive student or sage, which means a devotee, like a devotee in the temple, well equipped with knowledge and detachment, which are the byproducts of bhakti, realizes that absolute truth by rendering devotional service in terms of what he has heard from the Vedanta Shruti. which means the teachings of Krishna consciousness that we hear from the Shastra, not only from the Shruti, but also the Smriti, which the Bhagavatam is Smriti, and Shruti is the original Vedas. So this is the science of Krishna consciousness. It is a science. It's not a sentiment. People take and get some sentiment like the right-wing politics, and they take that as religion. Although it is not religion, it is a sentiment. So, therefore, one has to practice bhakti scientifically. And what are some of the evidences of this? Like in the Bhagavad Gita, you have that verse, Raja Vijay Rajaguyam Havicham Idam Uttamam Pratyak Savagamam Dharmyam Shushukam Kartam Avyayam. Pratyak Savagamam Dharmyam. Pratyak means direct experience. That I'm just not, like our friend was saying, not just repeating like a parrot, but hearing and having that knowledge become realized through practice and detachment, which is, by the way, we just read in Bhagavad Gita recently how the Arjuna is complaining to Krishna in several verses. Like, how do you control the mind? It's like trying to catch the raging wind. How's it? I don't think it's even possible. Vayoriva Saduskaram, like trying to catch Vayu, the wind. It's not possible. He said, the mind, it appears unendurable and impractical to me. Arjuna is complaining, quite frankly, to Krishna, and Arjuna is extremely qualified, highly cultured, a Kshatriya, advanced in knowledge and Vedic culture. And Krishna says, yes, it may appear like it's impossible. He says, but it is possible by suitable practice and detachment. So when you practice the science of this rendering devotional service, then the light is turned on, you can see, and vairagya, you become detached. So by practice, what is that practice? Well, rising early, bathing, going to Mangalarti, chanting your rounds, all the things that we normally do, as that Prabhupada has given us, and as earlier on, the last week we were hearing about that, it's the very foundation of Krishna consciousness. That is the Vedic culture. And by following it and practicing it, results, and that knowledge becomes manifest in your heart, and all the good qualities that are normally associated with the demigods, they become manifest in the person of a devotee. So that is the scientific aspect of Krishna consciousness. Now, in the modern world, we have science with a capital S, which is like a type of dharma, almost, a fanatical dharma, and the scientific process and the objective observer. But many have noted, even amongst modern scientists, that there's this thing that when the scientist performs the experiment, just the mere presence of the observer becomes part of the experiment. You can't separate the observer from, like say you're mixing some chemicals, but you can't separate that process from the person who's doing the observing and who has a certain set of preconceptions and who is interacting on the molecular level with the stuff that they're experimenting with. So there's this old saying that I always thought was wonderful, expectation affects perception. You see something, you may see someone and they're doing something, but because of your attitude towards that person, you may see what they're doing. You may not even see what they're doing. You may see what you think they're doing because you expect them to be acting in a certain way, and you're thinking that. We've seen many instances. Therefore, they say in legal circles that eyewitness testimony is the most unreliable testimony of all. Give me the DNA, give me the hairs, give me the blood trail, but so-and-so saw something. I saw him stab that guy. Like there were some devotees, they were in a campground, a Sankirtan party, and they had some little Gaurnitai deities, and they brought them out put them on a little box or something. And they're having kirtan, and they were dancing around the deity, circumambulating. And then someone had called the police, they have these children tied up, and they're dancing around them and stabbing them with knives. Which is, what could be further from the truth than that? That's an unreliable testimony from an eyewitness, because they're thinking, it's some weird cult, and like those little kids, it's the deities, and they're stabbing them with knives. I don't know where they got that. So that is completely unreliable. And I was thinking about this. I was looking a little bit into the history of Jesus Christ, and there was a Russian traveler and writer named Nicholas Notovich. And in 1887, he was traveling through Ladakh and Tibet, going to these Buddhist monasteries where they have these ancient Pali and Sanskrit scriptures. And he came across an account of Jesus visiting this monastery. And of course, the Christians claim, this is bogus. Jesus never went to India. He never went to Nepal. He didn't go to Ladakh. I mean, there's no historical evidence. They all completely disregard it. But here was an account of Jesus, that he had come. He was persecuted in his homeland, and he had come traveling with a merchant caravan, specifically they mentioned, like Marco Polo, just like that, same route. He had come with a merchant caravan, and he had traveled all over India. And there's even a place in Kashmir, in Srinagar, where there's a tomb of Ishus and his mother Mary. And the locals know it's Jesus. They've been worshiping that place and keeping it as a holy place for the last, 2,000 years. They know who it is. And so Notovich, he wrote an article that was published actually in French about these Pali scriptures that gave these accounts. They were very old, and they gave the accounts of Jesus visiting there in Ladakh and how he was a great mystic and spiritualist. And he was also preaching to the people, preaching love and compassion. And so Max Mueller, the Indologist and the Sanskritist, he completely discounted this and tried to disprove it and said that Notovich was a fraud. And then they sent some British scholars there to that monastery. And they asked to see, they asked about the existence of those scriptures. And the monks were like, no, there's no scriptures. There's nothing. We don't know anything about this. No Westerner ever visited here. And they were completely non-compliant. Why? Because of the consciousness. They perceived the consciousness of the Christian dudes who wanted to disprove everything. And so they didn't give him anything. And then somebody else went there, Swami Abhayananda, who was president of the Vedanta Society in New York from 1897 till 1920 something. He went there and they said, oh yes, we have these. Yes, there was that Russian guy who came in 1887. They had admitted everything. Oh yes, and he had translated those. Oh, of course, yes. That was just a couple of years after those British researchers were, because they wanted to disprove everything. So the monks could immediately perceive, the monks are purified. They could perceive these militias, Oh no, there's no scriptures. There's nothing. We don't know what you're talking about. That doesn't exist. So.
Who told you so?
Yeah. So they're got what they were looking for. There's no evidence. And then someone else who is humble and submissive and purified and trying to find the truth. Oh yes, right here. Here, we'll show you what we have. It's very fascinating. These are very ancient. These normally nobody gets to see these. We don't let anybody see these, but we'll let you see them because we see you're sincere in your consciousness. So that is science. The performer of science is influencing the outcome of their scientific investigation by their consciousness. And in terms of spiritual enlightenment, it is through purification and purity and realization, janat yat yasur vairagyam, acquiring of knowledge and detachment, one becomes elevated. Then one can see things in a different way. And then there was a gentleman named what's his name? Holger Kirsten, who researched. Well, there was another fellow named Nicholas Roerich in 1925. He went to Ladakh after Swami Abhayananda, who's an American follower of Vivekananda. He went there in 1925, and they were very open with him. Oh, yes. Everybody knows these stories. All the local people were all telling him about Jesus. Yes, we know this Jesus. And they had never heard of Notovich's book or his publications about these things. They were not contaminated by Western exposure. And they're like, oh, yes, our family, we've been telling this story for thousands of years, 2,000 years, how Jesus came here and interacted with the monks. And he was a very elevated spiritual being that everyone appreciated. And they opened up the monastery and showed him all these old shastras. Oh, yes, everybody knows about that. Even just the local people. So, therefore, if you look on Wikipedia, they say how the scholars all say that no, that never happened. They always want to discredit India or anything Vedic culture. They want to discredit immediately because of the prejudice of their rigid Christian, like a horse with blinders on. I can't see anything else, only what's right in front of me. They can't have a wider perception because of lack of purification, because they don't practice the science of bhakti. Therefore, they have no access. It is only by practicing bhakti that you gain access to Krishna. And without that, it doesn't exist. It's not real. No such thing. It's idolatry and what do they call it? Someone who doesn't believe? Heathenism. It's heathens and idolaters and blasphemers who don't accept the path of the upright British Christian missionaries. So these things are going on. But the science of bhakti all becomes revealed to the sincere practitioner from within the heart. So therefore, jara is an impetus for those they become afraid. Oh, I better become Krishna conscious, otherwise I'm going to get punished. Nobody wants that, right? Let me become purified and better myself spiritually. All right, so we'll stop here. Any reflections?
Also, I think I mentioned before, I don't know if I mentioned this devotee before, this Radha Madan Mohan Prabhu. He makes a lot of videos. I think he works with the BI, like TOVP videos, but he also does some studies into the Bhavisha Purana, which of course the scholars say is a false Purana and was written, 1200 AD. But the Bhavisha Purana speaks about Jesus. And Sutta Goswami speaks the Bhavisha Purana, and he talks about a sage who came across another sage in the Himalayas named Ishaputra, son of God. And he says, oh yeah, I went to preach to the Malecha races and they tried to kill me and I came back here. So it's there in our scriptures also. Yeah. But then they try to discredit naturally.
Yeah, the information is there if one is willing to open one's eyes and purify oneself through the practice of bhakti and become open to these interesting truths. What was that? There was one show about the FBI investigators who investigated paranormal phenomena. I forget the name of it. The truth is out there. What's that kind of thing? X-Files. Yeah, X-Files. The truth is out there. Well, the truth is out there. Actually, the truth is in there too, but you have to undergo the process to reveal it. And then many things you can understand that will not be understood by those who are wearing the blinders of attachment to sense gratification, life after life after life. Anyone else? Okay, we are done. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.